Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here. Welcome back to the channel. So a few of you guys have been asking me recently, hey, what do you think of your first MMORPG today? Now that you've had the experience of jumping around MMOs and seeing different concepts and mechanics and systems, what would you change with your first MMO? And in some cases, people have been asking me, what is your first MMO? All great questions, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to turn this into a discussion video so I can involve all of you folks in, discussing what your first MMORPG was, and what would you like to see changed or added to it. Let's begin. Dun, 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 dun. So here we go, story time. Come on, gather around the campfire. Let's go. My first MMORPG, for some of you guys that are maybe new to the channel, first of all, welcome and thank you for the support. My first MMORPG is the Lord of the Rings Online, which I started playing in 2010. I jumped into LOTRO at the tail end of 2010 because the game went free to play from a subscription-only model. Now, I didn't just jump into it because I was a cheapo and I didn't have money at the time in my first year of college. I am actually a big Tolkien fan. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, anything Lord of the Rings related. I watched movies when I was a kid, fell in love with it, and then went back and bought the trilogy of books, and I started reading that, and I was one of those, I guess nerds or geeks that would read the book or read the trilogy once every year or 2 years, and it's something that I can't do anymore because of work and all that stuff. But I was really like that, and when I watch the movies, it always has to be the extended versions, and on any free Sunday, I'll put on the appendices and watch the behind the scenes and the making of the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. I just love pouring into, that lore and stuff. So imagine me, that big of a geek, jumping into a game that's really based on the world of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. That was a huge pro for me, which was why, I had no problems with LOTRO being my first MMORPG ever. And I was aware of other MMOs like, World of Warcraft and, the other stuff that has come and gone since. But I picked LOTRO because it just felt like a natural fit. I would enjoy the world and the characters and stories, and I did. So to answer some of you guys' questions, what would I change looking back at LOTRO now and where the game is at today? Again, it's going to be a pretty subjective thing for me to discuss here because my experiences and what I like and don't like about LOTRO will be really probably different from a lot of you others out there, especially those of you that play LOTRO. Since I've started playing, there's been lots of things that have been happening to the game with the expansions, new content, new system, mechanics, and stuff like that. So I guess I will start with what I don't want to see changing in Lord of the Rings Online. I think that'll be a fresh twist. And for new players watching that have maybe never played Lord of the Rings Online or are new to MMOs in general, LOTRO is going to be one of those games that are going to be distinctively different from other MMOs when it comes to the narrative, because Lord of the Rings Online is, of course, an officially licensed IP. The Lord of the Rings IP, the intellectual property, is based on the source material, which is Tolkien's books. So the game, LOTRO by Eddington developers, formerly Turbine Studios, has to adhere to a lot of the narrative beats that are found in the books, so it cannot deviate too much. So Lord of the Rings Online, when it comes to a main story or the main quest narrative and arc, it is the epic book story that you, the player, follow the footsteps of, the Fellowship in the One Ring saga based on the Third Age, and you don't necessarily join the Fellowship. You work behind the scenes with all these prominent characters like Gandalf and Elrond and Aragorn and Frodo, to help them on their journey and for you to grow and experience your own adventures in other areas that aren't covered in the movies or in the books. Like you'll get to go to the North Downs and you'll get to go to Angmar. So there's a lot of great stuff in the main story, and even in the PvE content questing that I really love. So the one thing that I don't want LOTRO to change ever is to meddle with that core essence of what the Lord of the Rings Online, the saga, should be. And to their credit, even though the epic story, the conclusion of the One Ring is over now since the Mordor expansion came out last year, they've kind of gone and created the Black Book of Mordor, which is the continuation of the epic story to take your character further, looking at other places that the books and the movies don't necessarily cover in depth. I like that concept, and to me that shouldn't change, because when you think about LOTRO, essentially it's the journey that your character goes on and the friendships and the places and how close the game can bring you to this world. If they lose that essence, then LOTRO just dead. It's soulless. And the fact that the developers know that that is the core experience that it wants to offer players, That's great, and I don't think that should ever change. But speaking of change, Lord of the Rings Online has gone through multiple phases of changes when it comes to content and systems. So in a way, I guess I'll try and weave in some thoughts about what I think about LOTRO and how it's evolved over the years, starting with systems and content. With all the expansions coming and going, from Moria to Rise of Isengard and Mirkwood, you got the 2 Rohan expansions, and then there's a big gap of quest packs. There was no expansion for the Gondor sequence of quest packs, and then finally we come to Mordor last year. A lot has happened. And I think one of the things that really changed the most was the game's focus on group content, which it's one of those things that I look back now and I just go, oh, missed the ball. LOTRO really dropped the ball there. Because while it is a sort of almost a niche MMO offering this Middle-earth Online experience to people who are really the target audience, #1 target audience, are people who love Tolkien and love Lord of the Rings. I think that there should be, or there should have been, a point in time where somebody on the development team, there should have been a keeper of some sort that is in touch with the MMORPG community. Because LOTRO, from the way I look at it, from the period between 2014 to 2016, they were focusing solely on the Lord of the Rings aspect of the game, and they should, but part of me thinks that somebody on the team, or the whole team, didn't really think about what this game means to be an MMORPG when it comes to group content, because for a while there was a drought, and there was this whole thing where, I'm not kidding you, the community manager came out and said, group content isn't our focus anymore, because the population or the player base for group content, specifically raiding, wasn't there. That is a huge mistake. And me being a player active at the time when that was said, you started to see people just drop and go. Like, okay, fine, fair enough. Since you've said that, we'll go to other games where they have that, because that's what you need to be a complete MMORPG, to offer that sort of experience. Because for some reason, I don't know why, that the studio thinks that, just because you've got players in here that love Lord of the Rings doesn't mean that they also are expecting a proper MMORPG experience, where things like PvP and raiding and group content are all important part of that MMO experience package. So in hindsight, they really shouldn't have dropped the ball in that regard, but they did. And they've been slowly making up for it. Standing Stone Games has. They've brought back raiding in the last couple of years, and group content seems to be more of a focus now, which is, again, great. But if they didn't do that back then, if they didn't come out and say that publicly, I think things would have been slightly better than what it is today, because it shows you that where their thought process was back in the day, and I think that was a big mistake. Elsewhere in the game, and this is really for me jumping around and leveling through all the MMOs that I've had to review recently, and being able to experience that leveling process. LOTRO's leveling process is very much similar to classic games like World of Warcraft, because you've had all these years of content to go through, and at the very vanilla experience leading up to probably the first couple of expansions, you do see it traditionally. So the pacing of the leveling was slower, and there was a lot of things in there that make you go, this was so made back in the day. Lots of back and forth. The ideas for the questing just felt traditional in a way, which a lot of people may enjoy. You may enjoy picking up 3 clusters of quests to go and do 3 different fetch, kill, or talk or whatever, and then you ride all the way back halfway across the map and you turn that in. A lot of people enjoy that sort of experience. These days with modern MMOs, it's usually on the go, on the fly. You're always moving forward. You're never going back, because the game is usually trying to move the story along with you. So that means you're progressing the main story while you're progressing the zone story or map story from NPC quest givers that are in the area, not necessarily related to the main story, but everything is packed neatly and compactly for you for convenience. Early LOTRO didn't really have that, so that experience is very familiar with WoW, and I don't really have a problem with that. It's just looking back at it now, when you get to the later areas, the more modern LOTRO, and you see the questing experience even in the Mordor expansion, which came out last year, nothing really has changed from the core questing mechanic, which to me is a little disappointing. I can see why they didn't do it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, maybe they don't have the resources to implement something new or something fresh, or secondly, they just don't want to do it. They don't want to change their style, which is totally fine. So what do I mean by that? If you look at, let's take again World of Warcraft for example. ever since I started playing WoW, and my first time playing WoW December, and then coming to now, I've got 5 alts at 110. Looking at how they've changed things every expansion in terms of what they've brought to the PvE experience when it comes to questing. They've diversified the offering somewhat. So you've always got different variations of quests to do in terms of design. So in one, you'll still have the usual stuff of kill this and kill that. And then the other one, WoW has always got this fun stuff. You ride a helicopter and, you kill a bunch of things, or you do something funky. And with Legion and Warlords of Draenor, they've added in treasure hunting mechanics to, again, diversify what you do PvE-wise to get experience and gear. And then in Legion, of course, you've got world quests, which, while a lot of people hate the idea of world quests because they're repetitive and whatever, it's still something different that if you go back and play TBC or you play Cataclysm, you're like, I wish there was stuff in there like that, just to make things more interesting. LOTRO, from the duration of the game's beginning until the end, you do not see anything out of the box like that at all. It's just pure the same thing. Nothing has changed. And in hindsight, kind of disappointing. I mean, does it need it? Does LOTRO need stuff like that? Not really. And another thing, again, to consider, as I said at the top of the video, they've got very strict guidelines to adhere to. So what can they actually add from a questing perspective that will not break the lore? Because that's important. A lot of people don't want LOTRO to be, one of those games like Shadow of Mordor or Shadow of War where, the developers just bend the lore to their will. LOTRO is really very strict with that. But I still feel, with sharper minds and with a little bit more freedom and creativity, they could have made the questing experience in Mordor a lot better than what it currently is. I finished Mordor only recently, maybe in April or in March, when I went back with a good friend Wigga, and I finished the Mordor expansion. And I have to say, while stories are great, and stories are one of LOTRO's biggest strengths, the execution and the design of the PvE questing has been stuck with the same thing since 2007. And it's a real shitty thing to say, but the quest designers probably didn't change too much, and I would like to see fresher people with out there ideas that can make things more interesting and diverse when it comes to LOTRO's PvE. Other things that I would change, I mean, a lot of people, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and it's just lamenting, the lack of anything got to do with PvP. And again, this is a very fine line, because what can you do with LOTRO's PvP, or PvMP as it's known, player versus monster player? So I guess I'll tell you guys what the game has in case some of you haven't played LOTRO before. LOTRO's PvMP is basically one persistent map called the Ettenmoors, where if you want to play with your main PvE character, you are known as a Freep, and you go into the map, and who you'll be fighting are same real players that are playing as monsters. So you log out of your PvE character, you go to the monster screen, and then you pick one of the monster classes, either a warg, an orc, an uruk, or whatever, and then you play as that. That is really it. In its essence, that's it. You got the good guys fighting the bad guys. It's not balanced at all. And progression is all about getting ranks to earn titles and cosmetics, and that's it. You get nothing of substantial use to bring back to PvE from the Freep side, except maybe a cool title for bragging rights. When I was heavily playing LOTRO back in the day, PvMP is one of my favorite things to do, because that is the only PvP we got. And as a raider and as somebody who's hardcore into group content at the time, once you've burned everything out, what's the next thing that you can do to challenge yourself from a class perspective, or you want to see how you fare against other players? You only had PvP as an option. So at the time, 2014, 13, 15, I didn't know any better. I'd go out there and I thought this was the best thing ever because of the adrenaline, and I love big Zergy fights. But the Moors, as we affectionately call it, also has soloers roaming, duo, trio roaming groups, small groups, and then you've got the big Zergy fights. It just felt great. Now you go play other games like I have. In 2016 is when I created this channel where I go on different adventures to review MMORPGs. You see all these different battlegrounds and arena fights and just cool ideas for PvP, and the idea of making matches balanced, for example, putting everybody on the same equal footing, and then it's just down to skill and most times your latency. That's where I start to feel like, oh my god, this is great, this is really, really fun. and some of the rewards as well, in terms of how you get reward for PvP. These are just great things that when I look back at my first MMO, which is LOTRO, I just think that even though I love that sort of stuff now, there's just no way LOTRO could implement that without, again, breaking the lore. Now, this might sound like an excuse that I'm putting out there for Standing Stone games, like, oh, they can't be a good game because they have to follow the books or whatever. Not exactly true, because like I said, you know, better, sharper minds in there with more freedom and creativity would have probably come up with something. And they have tried from a PvP perspective. They added this new, like, Dota 2 MOBA map where you've got NPCs on a bridge and stuff like that in Osgiliath. Didn't really take off because I think a lot of the player base at the time already have probably moved on from PvMP, or are just ignorant and, you know, immune to change. They just didn't want it to change. They wanted something fresh for the Edmores, but they didn't really want a new map. So I've seen ideas thrown out there like, let's have a siege system like Guild Wars 2 has. Let's add catapults and trebuchets into moors so that taking keeps and all those castles and outposts become more interactive. Well, again, that sounds great on paper. Looking back at it now, even with resources, LOTRO probably couldn't pull it off. Because I've seen some systems in game that they've implemented, from the legendary item system to mounted combat to essences. Every one of these little systems that they've implemented has always been, well, I guess for a better term, half-baked and not really followed through enough to make it of any significance. Mounted combat, for instance, another one of these things that I look back on and go, oh man, wasted opportunity. Riders of Rohan, the expansion, was 2012, and I was excited for it because, you know, we were getting to fight on horseback. That's awesome, especially if you're a big Lord of the Rings fan and, you know, you love everything Rohirric and Rohirrim and Rohan, essentially. That's great. You get to now fight on horseback. And at the time when the expansion launched, all you could do was really fight war bands, which is just clusters of enemies out in the landscape. And that was it, really. The implementation, the execution was really, really poor because of whatever coding they did. You know, lots of rubber banding. It didn't feel smooth enough. Using them in towns, absolutely horrible. And after that, it just like they just left at the corner for quite some time. You know, there was no content for mounted combat. Nothing really happened. And then fast forward 2-3 years, they brought out the same concept, which was roving threats, which are basically Warbands 2.0, only this time you get more tangible rewards from doing it. It's stuff like that that make you go, in hindsight, you know, if they had really fleshed this out further, mounted combat here, next content for that here, and what we want to try and do here and here and here. If they had a long-term plan for that, great. But it seems like a lot of the systems that LOTRO comes out with, there just isn't a long-term plan there. And it just, looking at it now, it's just kind of disappointing, but hey, what can you do? Last but not least, a lot of people also tell me, you know, when I make LOTRO content and whatever, I think this has been documented a lot, it's just the graphics and the optimization and the performance of the game on modern machines. And yeah, I can relate to that. You know, like when I was playing, I jumped into WoW for the first time in December, and my expectations of World of Warcraft was that it's going to be an old game. And you have to be fair to me. I think a lot of new players that never play WoW will probably have that sort of perception. You know, it's daunting, it's 14 years old, what am I going to get? Based on what I saw in the vanilla areas, I'm like, yeah, definitely old. But I went all the way up to Legion, and good lord, the graphics got better, optimization got better. Even now for BFA, I don't know what they did, but my machine now can run on like the preset of 10 beautifully. Absolutely no issues at all. And keep in mind, this is a 14-year-old game, but Blizzard has millions of dollars to spend on WoW, so they've got the funding to do it. With LOTRO's case, you just never know whether we'll see a graphical update or not. A lot of people have said that the graphics are very dated now, they can't get into it, the combat's clunky, it's slow, and I think the biggest thing for a lot of people is the optimization. You know, without a 64-bit client, everything is just sluggish and, you know, just being dragged along, essentially. So, again, as a player at the time, having no knowledge of any other games out there, you don't think about these things. You're like, okay, yeah, this is normal. This is normal to me. You know, and a large part of that is just me being ignorant to what's out there. You know, I didn't have an open mind, and I would not consider playing another game. So, really, starting this channel has been almost an eye-opener, really. And now when I look back, yeah, loading times for LOTRO are crazy. The amount of time, how long it takes to load in, and how sluggish it is, and all the crashing issues, and all the stuff that have been there, you know, from an optimization point of view for years and years and years without being fixed. These things, when I look back on, are things that really I think the game could improve moving forward, but their priority, I think, Standing Stone Games will always be on the content, and I'll give them points for that content. Whatever all the flack that Lord of the Rings Online has taken over the years, they've stuck by their content thing. You know, they've always tried to put out the content, and now to see them working on stuff like seasonal festival dungeons or whatever, just something to do with content, I can give them props for that. But looking back at it now, from all the games that I played and just thinking about LOTRO, yeah, there's definitely a lot that I've seen and learned that I think LOTRO could definitely benefit from. It's just how much of that, you know, can they implement from their resource pool and from, you know, a lore perspective as well. Because even though now it's great to look back and say, yep, I want this and this and this from that game and here and here and here, you still have to A and B them against what LOTRO can do when it comes to lore. And I think that's one thing that's kind of holding them back a little bit. So really, that's my 2 cents on you know, my first MMORPG, and looking back at it now, what do I think of it? Great question, actually, honestly, and honest to God, this is something that I wouldn't do in my own time, you know, like every time I get together with some friends or with people from another game and we talk about the old times in LOTRO or whatever, you don't really make a comparison here and there. So discussion videos like these are great to take a walk back to memory lane and just, you know, reminisce about stuff like that. And a large portion of LOTRO's enjoyment for me, like I said, just to recap now, story definitely, atmosphere, the environments, even on the highest graphic settings, and while, you know, optimization isn't great, but when you go back to places like Moria or Rohan and Hobbiton and just look at the scenery and the setting and the vistas, it's really, really awesome. Music is great, of course. Chance Thomas, who I really enjoy his work. And that's about it. I think I've just rambled on about Lord of the Rings, and I can go all day just talking about LOTRO, really. And, you know, I've got, again, so much memories from LOTRO that I really, really cherish. And back then, it didn't seem like it. It seemed like, yeah, the game's giving me all the fun. Also, another thing to note, not these days, you know, when I think back, a lot of that fun has been really to do with the people that I was playing with. Because, you know, as my main MMO at the time, my first MMO for about 6 years plus, you do tend to meet people that, you know, you're still friends with today, and that is really the case. You know, people like Wigga, who's on my videos a lot, I met her in Lord of the Rings Online, and, you know, for a while now, you know, you see Arv and Kat, all of these guys were from Lord of the Rings Online with me. We were all in the same rating line, so the people really also makes the game. And yeah, I'll always cherish LOTRO for that, you know, in terms of the memory and the fun that it's given me, content-wise, PvP, the raids, the people, the laughs. And yeah, I have no regrets being a subscriber to LOTRO for about 5 years straight before I dropped it in 2016. You know, I've got no agenda against LOTRO. Like, you will see me bash it sometimes, like I did when I had that overreaction knee-jerk video to them with the, you know, putting out the black box of Mordor, or loot box, or whatever the hell that thing is. You know, I get upset, I criticize, I lament stuff out of admiration and love for the game, because it's given me so much. I don't want to see it go down or put into a category of MMORPGs that are failures or, you know, dead games, because, you know, it's kind of hurtful if it's your first MMO. I don't know if some of you guys can relate, but it's kind of hurtful, you know, when you see that and it's like, oh man, I started there. That's the game that, you know, got me to MMOs, and to see it suffer like that kind of sucks. So I have no agenda, I have no intentions against LOTRO. I wish it all the best, and I still play it from time to time. I'll log in, I pay my house bills, or I, you know, check out the new festival or whatever. So yeah, again, great question, you guys. Thanks for bringing it up. Thanks for taking me back to memory lane to talk about this. So I'm done talking about LOTRO for now. I want to hear about you guys. What was your first MMORPG, and what do you think of it today? What would you change, or what you wouldn't change? Just talk about your first MMORPG in general, and would you recommend it to players? So that's going to be it for this discussion video, and yeah, it's a pretty lengthy one, so, you know, hope you guys enjoy this story, or not. So yeah, hit the like button for more MMORPG discussion videos, and if you're new here, I don't just ramble on. I usually review MMORPGs, but these videos are a great way to interact with you and, get your opinions because I like reading that stuff. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this and I will appreciate it. So, once again, I am Adrian and I thank you for watching. Which of these is not an MMORPG? A. World of Warcraft. B. Guild Wars 2. C. The Elder Scrolls Online. And D. Subscribe to the channel by hitting the button down here.